Good evening. It's that Weems guy here with First Person Safety. Joining me tonight is Tim Chandler, and Tim will introduce himself in just a second. Earlier this week, I posted a video asking about what qualifications make for a good firearms instructor. Tim immediately responded to that video and said, maybe you ought to talk about the pathways in which a person becomes a firearms instructor. And so Tim's a smart guy, so I'm going to listen to Tim. And that will be the first topic that we have reached tonight. And then we will move into a few other questions. And Tim is not shy about giving his opinion. So brace yourselves. Let's have a good time. Tim, introduce everybody and tell them who you are.
Howdy, folks. I'm Tim Chandler. Currently, I teach with FPF training, with 360 performance shooting, and with Justified Defensive Concepts. I'm actually a owning partner in Justified Defensive Concepts. And as Tiffany says, eventually I'll pick up something else. But for now, that's all I'm teaching with. I've been training seriously with firearms for right at 20 years now. I had the amazingly good fortune to come under the influence of the unfortunately no longer with us Todd Green, but he's the one who really set me on what I recognize now. I didn't at the time, but was the path to actually being an instructor at this. And after Todd, I've trained with just about everybody in the industry who's worth training with, save a few. But the next major influence I had was Tom Gibbons. So I held all of the range master certifications: instructor, advanced instructor, master instructor, shotgun instructor. I'm one of a relatively few people who hold all four of those. So I've been at this a little while. So I might be getting good at it eventually.
We'll take a minute there and just talk about how much of an influence Todd Green has been on the community. And I know for me personally, it was my gateway into the open enrollment world because I had never really paid much attention to it. And
Right.
then a friend of mine sent me an article that Todd wrote, and I read it. Like, oh wow, this makes sense, and that's coincided with him opening Pistol Forum.
Right.
And I was one of the early members on that. And because of that, I know people like you and Tom Givens and a bunch of other people. And that's what led me into this open enrollment world. And so he was my gateway into this. And so I'm eternally grateful for Todd. And I don't think enough can be said positively about him in the shooting community.
Yeah, he did a lot of good for a lot of people. I mean, everybody who knew Todd and was really his friend considered beating him in the head with something heavy at least once or twice. But he was at heart, he was a really solid dude, and he really cared about people, and he cared about this business, and he cared about doing it well. And he was one of those weird guys who, because he worked for manufacturers, he had a lot of insight into institutional ways of training and into the private sector way of training, the non-institutional ways that are more influenced by competition than sort of the traditions of the institution. So he was that weird guy who could sort of float between both worlds, and sort of that's where I started to get a lot of insight into the differences and similarities, overlaps, and reasoning behind why things were as they were in both sides. So yeah, I can't overestimate his importance in setting me on the path that I'm on now.
Yes. Yeah, he will be missed, but his influence is far reaching.
Right.
All right. So you mentioned the word institutional there when you were talking about Todd. So let's talk about the difference between institutional and non-institutional pathways to becoming an instructor. Let's first define what is institutional and what we're meaning by non-institutional.
Sure. My conception of it is an institution is going to be the general policing / law enforcement or military track. In the police world and in the military world, you have instructors in a wide range of topics. You have instructors in policing, you have instructors in constitutional arrest procedure, you have instruction in forensics, you have instruction in day-to-day patrol activity, defensive tactics, and firearms falls under one of the number of things that a newly minted police officer must be competent at to be effective when we send them onto the street to go and protect and serve the public. In the military, to take examples of one of my partners in JDC, Brett Harnish in the Marine Corps, he was an instructor in the Marine Corps. when he was enlisted. As an officer, he was instructor in, artillery for folks. So the military has instructors for specific tasks, for weapon systems, for all kinds of things. And that has to happen because they're constantly getting an influx of new people who are not familiar with these things, and they have to, at a minimum, be competent with them. And the failures to be at least competent with those things is life or death. If we think about some of the neat little toys that our military has, you start talking about fighter jets, you start talking about missiles, you start talking about ordnance. If that stuff isn't handled well, lots of people die. So being able to use those things effectively in combat, being able to safely live with those things on a daily basis, because you have to on basis. The institutions have a constant need to train people up who are going to be interacting with these things on a daily basis, whether they're in combat or not. It's still a potentially dangerous thing there. That's my conception of the institutions. They train instructors because instructors are going to be trained personnel, and that all exists to serve the overall larger mission of the institution and what it's supposed to do in the world. Does that work for you?
Yeah, I can give kind of an example here. I've been a peace officer for 22 years and counting in the state of Georgia. In order to teach what we call post Peace Officer Standards and Training Council credit classes, one must have attended an 80-hour instructional methods course, which has about a 50% failure rate.
Right.
Once the course is completed, the candidate then has to go do a teach back session at a regional academy and get the academy director's endorsement for certification. And then once they receive the initial general topics certification, then you can start taking specialty instructor schools. And so it's like firearms is a specialty training area, and it's an 80-hour school as well. So in order to be teaching firearms to law enforcement in Georgia, the person's had at least 160 hours of instructor training at that point. Defensive tactics is another instructor certification. It's a 2-week long class as well. Basic medical is another instructor certification. So those are all things that have to be done on the institutional side. Now, in different states, the length of time for those classes and what's required vary, and those have changed over time as well.
Right. As you are often fond of pointing out, there are a lot of different regulations, rules, and standards as you cross the entire nation. So there's not one way to do it. The overarching thing I heard when you explained that was liability, right? Because these are techniques, these are things that are going to be taught to people who are going to be using them in the field. So you need to have some means of quality control to ensure that what they're being taught fits inside the constitutional parameters that you have to live with as decided on by the courts, that has to fit within the tolerance for liability of policing in general or within specific departments. As you know, some of them have a little more tolerance for liability than others. But generally, there has to be some sort of command and control to ensure that what we're doing here doesn't turn into a gigantic mess out on the street. So that's what I think of when I think of institutional. It's designed to protect against incompetent people doing bad things, and that's good. And it's also extremely slow to change and extremely slow to evolve because these are court-tested standards. Why should we deviate from them? Right. Because this way over here is better.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, and I think it also sets a false level for what is good.
Exactly.
Well, you meet the standard, so you must be good. Well, the standard's the minimum standard.
Exactly.
So delve into what are some of the non-institutional schools.
So non-institutional is what I would consider basically the non-law enforcement NRA instructor credentials. That's probably the most widely accepted and widely known. And those are meager in their instructional level. The person who has been through the institutional process that you described is going to have a much greater breadth of knowledge, a greater depth of knowledge. Doesn't mean they're necessarily a better shooter, but they're going to know a lot more about the process of teaching from the process of receiving that instructor certificate. They're going to know more than your typical NRA instructor certification, which isn't to say that those certifications are bad, but let's just say that there's a lot left on the table to be, in my opinion, an effective and relevant instructor than just those kinds of certifications. And that's true of both of them, but definitely you're going to have a better shot of someone who rolls out of the institution with all those certifications, going through that process you talked about. That person's going to probably be a better instructor for someone than the person whose sole experience is the NRA cert. However, in the private world, there's no limit to how far you can take that, because you're not contained within this structure that doesn't have to report back to multiple layers of command authority, that doesn't have to report back to multiple post boards, that ultimately doesn't have to answer legislators and courts. You can pursue different avenues of instruction and learning on your own. You can, pursue adult learning at the local university or community college, or an online course. You can become very, very interested in competition. You can do all kinds of things to augment your skills and not have to ask anybody's permission. One of the better instructional development tools out there, programs out there, is one you and I have both been through, and that's Tom Gibbons' instructional pathway in Rangemaster. That, I think, produces a pretty solid assessment of someone's capability to do once again, kind of the bare minimum to be a good instructor. And if I had to, Tom does a great job of presenting the problem that the typical citizen is going to have to face. So your typical customer who's looking to get training with a handgun probably wants to be able to carry concealed to protect themselves. And Tom's coursework is going to paired with some of their own independent study. And there, of course, there are others out there. There are, a number of people who have their own instructional programs, but I think Rangemaster, as far as I can see, is the cream of the crop in terms of the non-institutional training pathways.
Yeah. Let's discuss the metrics for some of these programs, such as, folks, what we mean by metrics is what are the standards that the instructor candidate has to meet in order to achieve the certification. We've already mentioned NRA and Rangemaster. So let's start the discussion with the difference between what it takes to get the NRA basic pistol instructor certification versus the Rangemaster instructor certification. And then I'll kind of fill in on some of the institutional stuff from my experience. So what is your understanding of what the NRA instructor has to achieve?
I actually don't hold that certification, so I'm not sure. I'll have to defer to you, sir.
I do hold the NRA basic pistol instructor certification, and I have taught exactly one basic pistol class. I went to the NRA basic pistol class because I wanted it was early on in my instructor career, and I was like, I need to learn how to relate to private citizens because my stuff was from the law enforcement side, and I was hoping to get a prepackaged deal to roll out, and I ended up not being satisfied with it and not using it. Although I'm not, for what it is, it's not bad.
Right.
And I looked it up to verify. You have to go through like a 1 or 2 day instructional methods class followed by the basic pistol instructor class. But the shooting metric is you must put 16 out of 20 shots into a 6-inch group at 15 yards with no time limit.
That's pretty meager.
Yeah, and there's a written test from the class material as well. But the shooting test, folks, again, 16 out of 20 shots into a 6-inch group at 15 yards.
Right. I know guys you could blindfold who could do that.
All right. Now, tell our viewers and listeners what the metric is to achieve the Rangemaster basic pistol or the Rangemaster instructor certification.
So to achieve the Rangemaster certification, you have to shoot the range master qualification, which is considerably more difficult than most state certified, post certified law enforcement qualifications. You have to shoot that at 90% or better. You have to shoot the FBI qualification, which is easier than the range master qual, at 90% or better. And that is the qualification that FBI instructors have to shoot to be FBI instructors. You also have to pass an academic test. I forget how many questions are on it, but it's a pretty detailed and specific test. It's a 3-day class. So you get the instructional workbook, and when you're not on the range shooting for the 8 to 9 hours that you're on the range shooting, when you go back to your hotel room or your house or whatever, you are expected to study the manual for that evening. And you're not given time in class to do that. And on the final day, you shoot your qualification, and then, or depending on the weather, you may shoot after you do the written test. But you have to pass that written test, I believe, at least at 90% or better to get all that. And I got to say, folks, that's not easy. When I took my first range master, just standard instructor and development course, I had been at this for probably at least 15 years, seriously training. I read tons and tons of books. I've got it's not as extensive as Tom's, but it is a pretty sizable library of people that I've read from. And I thought the test would be easy. And it was easy for me to pass, but I thought I'd get 100. And Lee, you graded my paper, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Yeah,
I didn't quite make that.
You didn't get 100. You didn't get 100.
No, I did not. I did not. And that was because, I didn't pay as careful enough attention to details as I should have. And of course, one of the things you learn when you spend time around Tom is that he is a stickler for the details. So he has very specific terminology he uses. And it's like, well, what does that matter? Well, as I've done this and I've seen how many ways I can be misunderstood, there's a reason why the terminology matters. So when you look at the range master certification, you're graded, your shooting is graded on a timer with an audience. There's someone watching you every single round that you fire. And their job is to keep you honest. And I'd like to tell you that everybody who shows up to the Tom's class for that is going to be honest because they're a good character. But I've seen that there have been a few people who tried to fudge that, and they've had to be called out on it. So it is merciless. It's not a grade on you as a person. It's a grade on whether or not you're ready to adopt the responsibility that's inherent in stepping in front of a class of people who are putting their lives in your hands. So Tom does not broach any foolishness with that. And of course, that's not the only one out there. There's some other ones out there. I won't name the organization, but I saw one where the qualification was on the honor system. They have a recommended course of fire, which is a lot more generous than the range master requirements. And you just have to say that you did it, as opposed to Tom actually walking past your target, certifying it, and asking the person behind you to get them all in time and getting a yes or no. So the standards vary wildly, but I think that's why the range master is kind of a good metric to look at, because somebody who can pass that qualification is passing the FBI qualification at instructor level, and is passing the academic test. They probably know enough to really have a good start at being a good instructor.
A good start. That was
a good start. Absolutely.
To compare that to the institutional model, I can speak from Georgia and some of the federal models. For Georgia, the Georgia Post, just LE Firearms Instructor certification, and for the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center Firearms Instructor certification, both of those schools I've attended, they're both 80-hour schools. The very first thing we did on the very first day is we went into the classroom, we filled out all the paperwork, and then we were marched out onto the range, and we had to shoot at least a 90%. In Georgia, it was 90%. At the FLETC, I think it was 85% on their standard pistol qualification for officers. And if you did not shoot the qualifying score, you got sent home. You went and packed up your stuff out of the classroom, you got in your car and left, and you had to go back to your agency. FLETC, we had two people that did not make the qual. I think it was two that did not make the qual and had to go home. Um, at the Georgia Post qual, they actually invite more people. They fill the class, and then they bring people that are like the first so many on the waiting list, and they tell them to stand there on the side. And when they start having people fail out of the qual, they run people out on the waiting list. Say 4 people in the class pass the qual, they go grab 4 off the waiting list. They run them through, and if they pass, they get to stay and go in the class. For the FBI Firearms Instructor School, you had to go to what was called pre-qual day, and you had to pass 5 courses of fire with 3 different weapons platforms. And if you didn't pass like a single one of those courses of fire was a failure, you didn't come back for the 2-week school. So it wasn't like, we're going to come in, we're going to cash your check, and then at the end, we're going to test you. You got to already have at least a basic competency level to even stay and attend the course.
Right. And, they're not interested in trying to teach you how to shoot. If you didn't know how, why are you here?
Right.
You shouldn't be here. You're taking up a slot that somebody else could have better used. And there's a lot of logic to that. And even in Tom's instructor course, I've seen people. I remember the first one I assisted with, there was an individual there who he had never used a holster before.
That was actually your student class.
It was. Yeah,
it was your student class.
And I distinctly remember thinking, if you've never used a holster, why in heck are you here? Right? You shouldn't be here, dude.
Oh, and by the way, he had passed the NRA instructor class.
And you know what? In a credit to Tom, something else we need to talk about in metrics is the time that he has with you versus the time that the institutional schools have with folks, and the standards he's having them shoot to. I don't know about Georgia Post, but the most common qualification target used in Virginia is the old B-27, right? And folks, this is a target that has a scoring zone that's bigger than me, and I'm not a little man, right? It is every bit as wide as I am, and the torso area is bigger than I am. So it's not like you're having to be a sniper to pass a typical law enforcement qualification in Virginia. You compare that to Tom's class, where has a bottle style target with scoring zones. You have a 4-inch scoring zone in the head of the bottle. You have an 8-inch circle in the chest. You have a smaller circle inside that circle. And the only full value points you get are shooting inside that small circle in the chest and a small circle inside the head of the target. Everything else is docked down. And you have pretty stringent time standards to meet. And it's measured, Tom has a stopwatch and a whistle, but he doesn't do the law enforcement qualification whistle trick. I can always tell a law enforcement instructor, because they have the best set of lungs. They can hold that note like Kenny G on New Year's Eve, man. They can just stretch it right on out, because, no child left behind is a thing sometimes. But you're shooting to a considerably different standard in the range master qual than you are even in law enforcement quals. A lot of them, the FBI quals, the instructor qual is the closest, because it uses a very similar sort of target. So if you have somebody who can pass the range master qual on their first shot, they're doing pretty well. And to Tom's credit, I've watched that guy in that class who'd never used a holster before. He fired the FBI qual and scored more than 80%. In a couple of days of instruction and coaching. That person got to the point where they could pass as an agent the FBI qualification. You and I both know the FBI, with like 6 weeks, struggles to get a lot of people to even shoot 80%.
Yeah.
So that's impressive to me.
Yeah. You mentioned the long whistle thing. I'm taking over our training program for jail staff that are being prepared to go to the academy, and I'm having them shoot the qualification individually on a timer, so that we're not having the long whistle. The academy uses the range returning targets, and the targets disappear when the time limit's up. So that's the reason I'm running them on the individual timer. So we've talked about different levels of instructor, or the different pathways to becoming an instructor. Does the certification, quote, make the instructor?
Absolutely not. I always like to remember this joke. You know what they call the guy who graduated last in medical school?
Doctor.
Exactly. Anyone who's had any level of interaction with the medical system has encountered really good people and really bad people in that system. And they may have had the same degree from the same university, but that doesn't mean that they're the same and equivalent. And it's kind of the same case in firearms instruction. On the institutional side, there are organizations where being a firearms instructor is a full-time gig. In your department, it's not your full-time gig, I imagine. You have other responsibilities, and you teach. You're the instructor. You're running calls for them and that's how it is. It's typical in most agencies. There are some organizations and some agencies where it's a full-time gig, and if it's a full-time gig, that means you're not riding on patrol, and it means you're not standing post guarding a facility. And it means you're not doing the dangerous, boring, liability-heavy cop work that everybody else has to do. So it's kind of a plum assignment. And you have people who gravitate towards it because it's a better assignment than doing the job, right? And that's completely the wrong motivation to becoming a firearms instructor. I mean, the idea is you're going to be preparing somebody for probably the worst day of their life. You need to have a genuine desire to do that, a genuine passion for doing that, not, well, this beats the heck out of stand and post at this facility we're supposed to guard, right? So, and the same thing's true on the non-institutional side. You have people who are very, very enthusiastic. That's what I tend to encounter more than anybody else. I've encountered a couple of people who got a firearms instructor cert because they thought they were going to get rich. You're out of your mind. But most of the time it's someone who, I learned this, I'm really enthusiastic about knowing this, now let me go teach it. But pump the brakes a little bit. After your first certification, after your first class, you're probably not ready to hang out your shingle and teach. This is where the institutional guy who's going through those things, they have more exposure and a greater depth and breadth of knowledge than somebody who just got past their NRA certification and they want to hang out their shingle. You're probably not ready yet. That, as far as I'm concerned, the certificate is where you start being qualified to begin the process of becoming a good instructor. And I even inside institutions, you'll have guys who are really, really skilled and really capable, and you have somebody who's never done anything but the institution schools versus somebody who's been through multiple institution schools and multiple private schools, but both of them are certified in that agency now, so we're the same. No, no, your 7 minutes of experience do not outweigh the experience of this individual over here who's been through the training of 4 different organizations in the military and in law enforcement, and has pursued certifications outside of the institutions in the private sector, and has shot competitively, and you hold the same certificate, but you're not equivalent in your knowledge, your skill sets, or your ability to develop new shooters. So the cert is nice, and even the range master certification. I've seen plenty of people who managed to pass who probably they would be eventually, but as soon as you get that cert, you're not ready. I know as soon as I got my certification, my first one, I wasn't ready to start teaching classes. It was years before I started doing that. And I'd already been helping Todd in some of his classes. I'd already been AIing for John Murphy. I'd already been doing that stuff before I ever got my instructor certification. So I looked at that as a start, right? It's a good pathway to begin. Having it didn't mean I've arrived. Now I'm ready. Now I'm ready to start learning is kind of how I look at it.
Having it meant you're okay to get on the bus now.
Exactly. You're this tall, you can ride the roller coaster.
Yeah. The classes themselves tend to focus on the basic knowledge of the subject matter. There's still a lot to learn as far as the logistics of running a class.
Absolutely.
And putting together lesson plans, unless you're receiving a canned lesson plan because this certification certifies you to teach this particular class and exactly following this lesson plan. I know one of the things that I had to learn the difference between teaching law enforcement and teaching private sector is that in law enforcement, the students are a workforce.
Yes.
The class starts at 8 a.m. on Monday morning. At 8 a.m. on Monday morning, all right, everybody, you three, you're putting up the backers. You three, you're putting up targets. You three are putting out, this, that, or the other. And private sector, no, you better be there an hour ahead of the class at a minimum to have all that set up so that you can welcome the students as they arrive and start teaching the class, at the appointed time, because they're not there to be your workforce.
Yeah, there's a big difference between teaching candidates and clients.
Right.
Right. In the private sector, I deal with clients. I don't deal with people who have to be in my class and have to get my approval so they can get the paycheck or the job that they're looking for on the other side. They're volunteering their own time and resources to come and train with me. And I have to have a bit of a different mindset in how I work with those. And one of the things I see, sometimes we get institutional guys who hang out their shingle in the private sector and start teaching the private sector, and they haven't figured out that little trick that you mentioned there. They haven't figured out the difference between training candidates and training civilians. The things I might have done with my SWAT team over here might not be the same things I want to do with people who, they're accountants and teachers and dentists and so forth.
Right.
Might be a little bit of a difference in how much risk they've signed up to tolerate. Might be a little bit of difference in the acceptable casualty rate in, say, training people to become a Green Beret versus training people to defend themselves at the ATM if they need to.
Mm-hmm.
Little bit of a difference there that sometimes gets kind of lost in the sauce, right?
Yeah, I can remember my very first open enrollment class that I ran through my company. I think I had 7 students, and one of those was a buddy that I invited, so I would have more than 6. And I had them on the line, and I'm calling out instructions for like the next thing we're going to do, and one of the guys just turns and just walks off. What the? What's going on? Oh, I needed to go to the bathroom. I can tell you what would have happened in the police academy had someone just decided to have, I got something else I need to do, and walked off the line. We might still be doing push-ups or getting screamed or running to the gate and back. And I did not go through a paramilitary academy, and we would have been, as a group dealing with that situation. And, that's just certain things. And so that's part of learning when you're teaching the dentist and the whatever is, all right, folks, we stay on the firing line. If you need to step off the firing line, please let me know before you do so. It's
right.
range etiquette. There's certain things that you have to go. And if you come from one mindset and then all of a sudden you're dealing with a completely different other mindset, you have to be able to pivot as an instructor to match what your students are doing. One other thing I wanted to touch on with the institutional thing and non-institutional, say like the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center class, instructor certification it's a subject matter class, but it's also teaching how to administer courses of fire to a large group of people. And then you receive written lesson plans. It's okay, I'm going to carry out this lesson plan to a large group of people.
Right.
And then I'm going to score their targets at the end on the shooting test. There was not a whole lot of time spent on how do I coach that guy who's having a problem. That's where Range Master excels. That's probably one area in which the non-institutional schools in themselves are probably a little better.
Oh, absolutely. As you said, most institutions they exist to serve their own interests, not necessarily the interests of the people that are flowing through them. Your typical police academy is not there to produce the best shooter that they possibly can. They're there to, they're not making filet mignon. They're making Whoppers, and we got to make our Whoppers, and we got to get them out the door. And because we have this many slots, especially right now, I don't know about in your area, but in mine, the departments are absolutely hurting for personnel. Mm-hmm. Various things in our society have contributed to that. So they're not really interested in making a real high quality individual candidate. They're interested in, we got to get these people competent because we need warm bodies and patrol cars on the street. Just the way it is. And so coaching gets sort of left over it. And if you want to call it a problem, we'll call it a problem. But my problem with the institutions is that a lot of it is really just the actual part where people are shooting and are learning to shoot is really just kind of lightly supervised range time where they have ammunition and it's a sink or swim thing. You either figure it out or you don't.
Yeah.
And you may figure it out because you have really solid coaching from an experienced instructor who's learned how to do this, or you may get the guy who's been at this for 10 minutes, who's, spending way too much time in the weight room and just keeps screaming over and over again, focus on the front sight, or, stop jerking the trigger.
Yeah.
Because those are the two bits of coaching you're going to find. And
Mm-hmm.
it seems to be the only exodus a lot of guys are capable of is don't jerk the trigger, focus on the front sight. Neither of which is actually what's going down.
Right. I shot an 82 and an 84 on my academy quals, and you had to pass the course twice and whatever the number of attempts was to graduate. And I shot an 82, then I shot an 84. And so I was done at that. I was qualified. And I remember we had instructors on the range who came because it's a regional academy. There's 4 full-time instructors at the time. I think there's 6 now. The rest of the people who came to help on the range were like the lead firearms instructors' buddies who were all out in the field with different agencies, and their agency let them come for a day to help on the range. And we had a guy from an area agency that was just happened to be behind me on the line for a couple of days. And I was struggling, and he's like, you're jerking the trigger. Yes, sir. What do I do to fix it? Well, stop jerking the trigger. I'm like, well, thank God you were here, or we would not have managed to make it through this crisis. And
sir, can you spell tautology for me?
Yeah. And I get out of the academy, I go through some basic firearms instruction with my own agency, in which I was told, you're jerking the trigger. How do I fix it? Well, you don't jerk the trigger. Oh, wow, that's great. And then I finally got exposed to a person who had served in the Army marksmanship unit. And he's running me through a drill. And he said, he basically said, you're jerking the trigger. And I said, I got frustrated. I holstered up, turned around and said, sir, instructors keep telling me that, but nobody's taught me how to fix it. Right. Well, turn around. Hey, 5 minutes of individual coaching, if it was 5.
Right.
I was tearing the same hole out of a target. That day, I had managed to work my way up to like an 86 and an 88 on my agency qual. I went to becoming a 98 shooter on my qual. And it was funny when the light bulb went off, the instructor looked at him and said, it's effing magic, isn't it? And walked off, although he didn't say effing. He used the right word. I'm still in contact with him today. And occasionally, hey, thanks for what you did for me back in 1999. That got a lot of this started. I got my first instructor certification from that same institution in 2003. I started to really feel like I know what I'm doing in 2016.
Right.
And really in the last year and a half, 2 years, I'm really starting to feel like I have a mastery of the topic and I'm qualified to speak out on it and what it takes to be an instructor.
And you hit on something important there. It didn't take long to teach you the right way to do it, did it?
Uh-uh.
That's kind of my gripe and my frustration with all of this, because I've had the exact same experience you've had on the private sector side, because I didn't go to any law enforcement academies or any military academies, but I trained with guys who are law enforcement guys and military guys. I've trained with guys who are tier 1 special operators. I've trained with guys who are world champion pistol shooters. And I only feel like I've really started to crack the code fairly recently. And really I had to throw a bunch of stuff away. And I was thinking, once you figure it out, you're like, if I had been told this day one, and that's kind of my gripe, we could do so much more with the same amount of resources if our instructors knew what to do, knew how to teach it. And especially inside the institutions where you're asking people to go into harm's way and you're asking them to sort out very difficult situations. And I think you and I would both agree, a lot of the problems we see with bad shoots or questionable shootings, that happen that gain massive national attention have absolutely nothing to do with race and have a lot more to do with minimally qualified people who are scared out of their wits and don't really know what they're doing.
Right.
And that leads them to go for the gun more sooner than they should, or press the trigger maybe when they shouldn't, because they're all out of options and they're running purely on that angry walnut at the base of the brain, that amygdala response. And I contrast that with, I have over my training, the time I've been in training, I've had the opportunity to train a number of military and police folks. One of them is a deputy not far from where I live. He's fairly new to being a deputy, but he has had multiple occasions where he has been on the precipice of using lethal force. And one of them was a situation with an individual with a knife. And his description of that was he was sights on, slack out of the trigger. And I asked him, why didn't you shoot? He said, because I knew I was good enough that I didn't have to yet. I didn't have to yet. Right. He was in control of the situation. He was thinking. He was in this part of his brain that makes us human, because he'd had enough work and enough confidence in his mastery of the gun, his proficiency with it, that he knew, I don't have to do it just yet. And that person is alive. And he didn't have to go through a homicide investigation, because Ashton and I worked to make him proficient with that pistol. And it didn't take us 5 years. It took us a couple of days and reframing the way he thinks about it. And we got amazing results. You see that in Tom's classes. He gets results out of people in a relatively short period of time, just because he's helping them understand the process of firing a shot better. And of course, he occasionally has the luxury of working with bringing in people that have been prior students that have shown exceptional capabilities. Occasionally, even a couple of lunkheads like us will come in and we'll coach while he runs the show. We'll be able to do that individual coaching thing. It's a tragedy to me, because we could do so much more with the same level, with even fewer resources. We could get a lot more done if we just had instructors that knew what to teach. But, as Tom says, it becomes sort of a puppy mill. They're doing what they were taught. Right. And it becomes this self-licking ice cream cone of, well, we do it this way because we're the experts. Well, we're the experts because we do it this way, but we do it. And that's where the tension, I think, exists between the institutional side and the non-institutional side. A buddy of mine that I work with fairly often was the top in his academy class, top shot in his academy class, one of the top shooters in his department. So the first time we went on the range, he was humoring me, because, I'll bring Tim to the police range, and we got this thing there called a dueling tree. And I was like, oh, do you? What sort of contraption is that? He's like, well, there's steel plates on everything. I'll show you how it works. So how this works is we both draw at the same time, and the first person to get them all on the other side wins. I went, well, that seems interesting. I was doing my best Andy Griffith impression. Well, I think that'd be all right.
Yeah.
And I was like, so whenever you say go, he's like, well, how about you say go? I'll give you the advantage. He's like, wait a minute, don't you have to put on it? And I said, go, and produced a gun he didn't know I had.
Right.
And I immediately cleaned the plate rack before he got his gun out of the holster. And he's standing there with his pistol in his hand, sort of like this, going, what just happened? That movie, the one with Jackie Chan, Chris Tucker, which one of y'all just kicked me? It was one of those experiences. I didn't, what was that? And I was like,
competence.
That was competence. That was a vulgar display of competence, as Tom might say. He'd never seen anything like that in the police world. Now, I was cheating because I knew what those things were. I spent all my time getting my head kicked in by Todd Green, because we would shoot plate racks or dueling trees at each other. And guess who won all the time?
Todd.
Right? It was Todd. So he'd never seen shooting like that, but I'd become accustomed to shooting at such a higher level, because I wasn't hidebound by the institution. I wasn't constantly going, well, I'm the best guy here.
Right.
Well, no, I was never the best guy there. I'm still not. I don't think I ever will be, but I do all right.
Yeah. Quick note, something just came into my head. One of the benefits of the private sector side or non-institutional side is, so like with my private business, if I learn something better than what I'm currently doing, I can immediately change my program. If you're stuck in the institutional mode, that may take sending stuff up a ladder to get approval and everything. So the inertia and turning those ships doesn't happen as fast. And that may be why, well, it's not may, that's definitely why they don't tend to adapt as quickly as the private sector side does or the non-institutional side does. Um, One other thing there too is Tim mentioned, Tom bringing in students who've already graduated from his instructor class to come help. Folks, Tim and I and other people like us, we've spent a lot of time volunteering our labor, um, going to other instructors' programs and helping them by there. You go put up the targets, you go do the stuff and everything. That so you just so you can be on the range and hear their teaching.
Yep.
Absolutely. I've been through the range master instructor class. If you count the times that I've assisted, probably a dozen times now. And now, because I'm not standing there having to load mags and what did he just say, and I'm worried about my performance on the next drill or whatever, I just get to soak in the information. You pick up and you retain more. And earning one certification is the gateway to get on the bus. It's a continuous process.
Absolutely. And what you're talking about there is a process of apprenticeship, is kind of the way I look at it. The opportunity to go work with a very skilled, more established instructor who is solid. When I took Tom's first IDC course that I took with him, I was already familiar with what he taught. I'd already taken other classes with him, and I'd never taken the IDC because I never had any designs on being an instructor. Right? But I can guarantee you, I picked up maybe 30% of what he laid down in that class. And I was more advanced than most of the other people in it. I missed a lot, which just goes to show you, I still got the certification. I mean, I hit the target, I passed the test, but there was a ton of stuff he presented in there that just didn't stick because I look at it, when we teach, we come with, 20 pounds of material. We have no control over the size of the vessel that's being brought by the student or by the client. Some people come to you and they've got a 2-pound pail. Some people, they've got a thimble, right? You have no control over what they're going to grab from you and take away, but they're better served for having had it. And I can tell you that when I showed up to Tom's IDC class, I did not have a vessel big enough to absorb everything he presented. So being able to assist with those classes has taught me way more than I had even in the classes where I was sitting and hoping to earn a certification. So being able to be there, and especially the time I spent with Todd, most of the time I wasn't like coaching a bunch of people, giving high level input. I started hanging targets and just making logistics work. And I watched how he coached people. And Todd is one of the best coaches I've seen in the world of shooting. And he learned a lot from Ernest Langdon, and always commented very heavily about his ability to coach people. Todd was extremely good at coaching people. And I have the pleasure now of working with someone who I absolutely believe rivals or possibly even surpasses Todd in his coaching ability, and that's Ashton Ray. Ashton spent 15 years teaching people on the line, working with another instructor. There's something to seeing that many shooters over that prolonged period of time, that pattern recognition that happens when you just see that much of it. That's one of the things, one of the reasons why getting the instructor cert is a start. It doesn't mean you're qualified, because if you haven't spent that amount of time watching other people, watching how the line is run, watching what they're doing, developing that ability to sort of broaden your focus, that ability to, you can hear when somebody's got a gun out at the wrong time. You can hear a gun come out of the holster. We both know that feeling.
Just last week, as a matter of fact.
It's specific indicators that you have learned and become attuned to because of how much time you spent in the range environment. Without that level of apprenticeship, especially under someone who's as good at developing people as Tom is, because I had a conversation with somebody else who's a range master instructor, and he mentioned that Tom told him to watch this person And then Tom came back around. He was working with somebody else. I was like, well, you failed the test, bro. If Tom told you to stick with that person, what he means is, I want you on them until I move you off of them. Mm-hmm. He was like, is that what he was going for? Yes, that's what he was going for. There was something he wanted you to pay attention to there that you missed. Right. So spending time under somebody because Tom doesn't miss anything. It's amazing how much he can see. And, I see a lot, but I don't see as much as he does yet. So that time of apprenticeship, that time of working with somebody who can really develop you is invaluable if you really want to do this because you have a passion for doing it.
Right. One other thought that I just had there too was, I've already mentioned that I took earned my first instructor certification in 2003, and that was the Georgia Peace Officer Law Enforcement Firearms Instructor Qual. 2020 is when I went through FLETC's instructor school. So in between that first one in 2003, I've gone through the FBI's, I've gone through everything Rangemaster has to throw down and a bunch of other stuff, advanced at Rogers, all the stuff that and that folks can go look at my webpage and see all that. And then in 2020, I take the FLETC Firearms Instructor course. I walked out on the range and there was the thought that I wouldn't pass never entered my mind. As I stepped on the firing line is, am I going to shoot a perfect score or not? Right. Okay. The thought of, I hope I don't have to go back and tell the chief I didn't pass. Of course, at that time I was the chief, so I guess I'd call myself. But, there was like a rookie guy from a little small agency that his agency was counting on him. So they would have someone in their agency that could actually do their certifications. Right. And watching the difference in the pressure and stress level that he was experiencing versus the pressure and stress level that I was experiencing, I got to pay attention to everything that was said.
Right.
Because none of my mental energy was devoted into any possibility of failure. And one of the great things I love about the FLETC stuff is, while they have to satisfy a lot of different agencies, so they're just kind of slow to adapt and everything, is they've actually got a pretty good methodology for teaching an instructional class. And one of the things that they do is you have to go in for an individual interview with the staff. And you're not a recall test where you're answering a multiple choice. You're sitting down like me and you talking, and you've got to pass an interview with me, Tim, to get your instructor certification. And I walk in and the guy's doing the interview and there's set questions that they have to ask. And then finally he stops and says, this isn't your first rodeo. You're here just because you wanted this certification. And I kind of laughed, said, you could have taught this class, couldn't you? I said, yeah, probably. But there was a lot of work to get from that point in 2003 to that point in 2020. And I'm not worried about it now. I get to pay attention to everything that's being said and all the information when there's no stress. So like we've said it multiple times in this discussion, once you get on the bus, stay on the bus and keep going back to schools, keep going, occasionally go back and take one that was of high quality that you took previously. Right. Because you may come away with another 30% that you didn't get the first time. And it's amazing how much that will improve your knowledge base.
There is no Highlander moment in this.
Right.
Where the quickening happens and everything. No.
Right.
I can't tell you how many times I've had to completely reassess my knowledge on a particular topic, just in the technical aspects of shooting, because I encountered better information. A good example is in December of 2019, I trained with Tim Herron. I don't really care about competition because I a lot of the competitions is as much about how well you move and how you stage plan as it is how you shoot. And I don't care about that kind of thing. However, I'll go to just about anybody that might be able to make me a little bit better as a shooter. And Herron dropped the way he uses sights as sort of like an aside. We stopped the class and went, you said something crazy, tiny man.
Yeah.
We have to discuss what you just said, because what you just said is not how the institutions teach it. It's not how we learned it. And we suspect it may be a whole lot better than the way we've been trying to tell people how to use sights. So we're going to spend a little time. And he did that. And you know how animated Brett can be when he's excited. Tim Herron said that Brett went from not having said a word in the class to being lit up like a Christmas tree. Like, can't believe I've been doing it wrong for 30 years. Right? That willingness to, yes, I thought I was an expert in this thing, but I just found something. The true expert is, there's a phrase that Deng Xiaoping used. He said, if a cat catches mice, nobody cares what color the cat is, right? If it's a better way to do it, it makes me better. It makes me better able to take that complex process, because you and I both know how many people that we're training on handguns really, really are comfortable with using iron sights. A very small percentage. They never quite get it. But if I can take in 2 sentences and remove and explain it to them in the simplest possible process to go, because what have you heard? You need to see what you need to see, which I hated. I can't tell you how many times I heard that. See what you need to see. What does that mean? Stop speaking to me in riddles.
Stop jerking the trigger.
Exactly. Now I can tell you what see what you need to see means in 2 sentences. And people go, oh, okay. And then that whole cognitive load of, are my sights good enough, completely disappears. I would not have gotten that if I'd have looked at it and get, well, he's a competition guy. What could he possibly have to tell to some guy who's got 1,000 hours plus of tactical firearms training? I'm in this to protect myself. I don't care about I'll go to anybody who can teach me something. And I learned a lot more than that, but that was the big takeaway. And it was me, it was Ashton, it was 2 of my guys from JDC, and we all immediately went, we're going to reassess how we teach sighting. That only happens if you continue to develop yourself with an open mind, with a thought that I have not figured all this out yet. There's plenty out there for me to learn, and there are plenty of people who can still teach me.
All right. The last topic I want to close with here before we get into telling people where they can come pay you to teach them what you learned from Tim Herron. What is a baseline that students that are seeking instructors, what can they use to determine, okay, I've Googled firearms training in my area and I've got 4 results popping up, and I'm looking at these web pages trying to decide which one is going to get my time, money, and ammunition.
Right.
How do they evaluate those candidates?
I wish I could tell you that what you do is look for the union label and you'll be fine. Unfortunately, that's not the case. There are a couple of good ways available now that didn't exist before. When I was looking at it, I thought, I went to my first firearms training class, and it was a 2.5-hour presentation on the history of firearms on a video. And then we shot an FBI bottle Q target at 5 yards with 50 rounds with basically no time limit. And I went out to dinner with folks afterwards, and they talked about what a great class it was. And I went, no, professionals don't train like this. I'm going to go find the professionals. And I did. I found special operators and SWAT cops and whatever. And I learned some things, but not nearly as much as I should have. But those guys are the pros. I mean, some of those guys are tougher than woodpecker lips, and they kill more people than malaria and tigers put together. However, that doesn't make them a great instructor, right? It wasn't until I really spent time with Todd that I started to go, oh, a good instructor should not only have a relevant course of, because I was in classes, carbine classes, where people who didn't know how to zero a carbine were doing Australian peels. There's no point in that. There's absolutely no point in it. If you can't do the basics, this is what a lot of people don't want to hear. They don't want to eat their broccoli. But if you can't draw from a holster and reliably hit a 5-inch target at 7 yards on command in less than 2 seconds, you really got no business shooting from rollover prone under a car with your pistol. Because I can pretty much guarantee you that as ordinary Joe, or even as a police officer, the number of occasions where you're going to have to do that in real life is very, very slim. But the number of occasions where you're going to have to get your gun out of the holster on target and fire accurate shots to save your life, much, much higher percentage. I've seen classes where they don't cover holster work at all because, well, that's more advanced stuff. That is the fundamental skill of using a pistol. It's going to start when the problem starts. It's probably in the holster, and we got to get it out of the holster and on target and actually do some work. So how do you assess? Unfortunately, you can't just look at the credentials. What you can look at, you can look at things like Lee and I are doing right now, right? This is a resource where you're putting out an hour plus of two instructors talking about their philosophy and the way they approach this. And you can look at that and see, do these guys seem like they'd be providing relevant, useful training with a focus on helping me achieve my goals? That's a pretty solid way to do it. Another solid way to do it is to look at students, right? Students are the folks. And by students, I don't mean cultists, because there are instructors out there who develop a sort of cult of personality. And who have you trained with? Well, I trained with Instructor Bob. Cool. Who else have you trained with? I only train with Instructor Bob, because Instructor Bob is the deadliest man on two legs, and he's the only. You should probably ignore what they have to say. If somebody hasn't trained with more than one instructor, or, you know, as you mentioned, how many classes have you taken? This one. How was this class? It was awesome. It is simultaneously the best and worst class you've ever been in.
Yep.
Because you don't know any better, right? So you want to look at people who have for students who have a broad experience, or at least experience with multiple instructors, because everybody's not going to vibe with everybody. They may like something better than another guy. They might have shown up with their thimble, and a lot have been lost. So you want to have a good sample of multiple students. One of the reasons why Pistol Forum exists, I'm actually one of the founding members. I'm member number 4 on Pistol Forum. I helped Todd start it. He was in a fit of rage when he did it. And that's why I'm not higher up on it, because he just started doing stuff without talking to me. But as anybody who knew Todd kind of knew, when we got animated, I was getting emails at like 3:30 in the morning. Okay, I did this. How do I do it? I'm like, I have to go to work tomorrow, dude. But a place like that is a great place where it's one of the more training-centric forums out there. You can find a lot of good information, and you can see how people are regarded. You can mention certain names there, and people will go, he's solid. Here's what I learned from him. Or somebody will go, I took a class with him. I didn't like this thing, but I like these other things that he did. Or you'll mention some names, and people will go, absolutely not, under no circumstances should you ever waste money with that guy. It's really difficult for you folks out there in the world. And I know this because I've been you. I am you. Have the benefit of experience to teach me. However, because guys like me have gone before, and we've written stuff out there, and we're available to be contacted on places like Pistol Forum or through social media and stuff, we can help guide you. Because I'm an instructor sometimes, but I'm a student always. So that's the best you're going to get, unfortunately.
One of the things I did early on in the days of Pistol Forum is I found the open enrollment world. You know, Todd used to give certain people on that forum the label of SME, for subject matter expert. And I saw the deference that was given to those people because their opinion mattered. And other people on the forum understood, okay, that guy must know what he's talking about. I studied the backgrounds of those people and looked for the common things that were in their backgrounds, because if they are the people that the industry has acknowledged are the experts and knowledgeable people, what's common in their background is how they got there. Now, I can't go be at this point in my life, or at any point in my life, special forces guy or whatever, but classes that are available to me, I can go take. And so I look for the common threads in those backgrounds. And I also sought out training with those different people who the industry recognized as the masters, to see how they were presenting things, and to see, you know, sometimes I would go up and ask those guys, okay, who would you recommend that I go take classes from now that I've taken something from you? Right. And
that's a great way to do it too. Look at the commonality, look at people who have almost universal respect. Tom's a good example of someone who the vast majority of the industry has tremendous respect for him and his program and what he gets people to do. Paul Howe. I have never heard a bad word from Paul Howe, except from people who couldn't shoot to his standards and thought they were too stringent. We don't need to be that good to win a gunfight. They're telling Paul Howe that. Yeah, that's pretty goofy. I've heard great things about Mike Lamb. there are people in this business who have a solid reputation because they've earned it over a long period of time, or they've demonstrated specialty knowledge. Craig Douglas is an example. I don't think anybody has better close quarter work that's been more validated and more assessed. And pretty much everybody who's been through it is like, there's absolutely a solid mix of things there. And, that wasn't something he developed all by his lonesome. It was in collaboration with a lot of other people. So there's another good way of seeing, does this person that you're looking at, are they a collaborator? Are they working with other instructors? Are they doing any sort of peer development with other instructors? If they're the superstar and they're running around talking about Super Bowl rings and they're the best thing in the world, probably a sign that you shouldn't be training with them. Because if they're their biggest fan, they're probably not there to serve you very well, right? So that's a good point, Lee.
If there's one guy out there, and I'm not going to name him, anybody that tells you that they are the ultimate, the way, the truth, and the light here, and you can only learn the magic of doing this stuff by coming through them, they're scared for you to go compare their material to somebody else.
Absolutely. I've had people ask me if it's okay if they go train with other instructors in like shotgun. And I'm like, I hope you do.
Yeah.
I want you to go. I'll recommend a few people. I absolutely want you to go train with Rob Haught. If you train with me and you're serious about learning the gauge, I want you to train with Rob Haught. I want you to see where some of the stuff I've taught you comes from. I want you to go train with Tom. I want you to see where some of the stuff I've trained you comes from. And if there are other people you want to go and train with, I want you to go see what they've got to offer. And you'll be able to determine real quick after doing all those things that what I'm providing is pretty solid, right? Yeah. I know what I got. I know what it's worth. I'm not afraid of you training with other people, because you're either going to learn something I couldn't have taught you, or you're going to learn that I'm pretty good at this and I taught you well. And either way, you win.
Right.
And that's ultimately the goal here.
All righty. This has been a very, very good conversation from my point of view. I've enjoyed the heck out of it. I hope that our viewers that will watch this on YouTube and all the other social media stuff later will find as much value in it as I have tonight, because we got pretty long-winded. We've been going well over an hour. So folks, watch it all the way through the end so that you can hear this. Tim, tell them what you've got going on as far as classes coming up, and where can people find you and find. Yeah, you do have to wear the NASCAR jersey when you teach so that you get all of the different.
I do. I have to remember which hat I've got to wear. You can find my FPF training stuff, which is happening in Northern Virginia, mainly shotgun, at FPF training. That is, think of front sight press follow through training. Ashton and I have Shotgun 360 coming up in the Meat Hall range out in Oklahoma in a couple of weeks here in June.
Eat some Brahms for me, please.
We will. I think there's 1 or 2 openings left in that. It's almost sold out. We're doing an armorer's course in addition with it, run by Van Comp. So it's going to be a whole weekend shotgun extravaganza. It's going to be a lot of fun. And of course, Justified Defensive Concepts. We've got low light classes. We've got red dot classes. We've got carbine, precision rifle. We just did our 1 shotgun class. We've got 22 rimfire and a partridge in a pear tree. We got every weapon platform you can want to that's not belt fed. We got you served with Justified Defensive Concepts. So you can find me at any of those places, social media, web, whatever. I
got to tell you, I did kind of have a chuckle at your expense here recently. I had the honor of Dave Spalding gave me a battlefield promotion to handgun combative certified instructor here recently. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, let's see, I've got my business. I've got all the stuff I do with my professional job. I'm on staff with Rangemaster. And now Spalding has just certified me. I've almost caught up to Tim Chandler for like the number of places I have to teach.
Yeah, I thought you were a nice guy, Lee. I felt
like yeah, Ashton will tell you the truth on that. It's like, you're polite, but you're really not a nice guy. And there you go. Tim, I appreciate you coming on tonight and giving a lot of your valuable time and insight. And man, I appreciate it. I've enjoyed our collaborations over the years. Folks, my trigger management class Uh, Tim doesn't know how much he played into developing that, because Tim was present for a class that was supposed to be one class. And 5 minutes into it, we realized the student body did not have the level um, of skill that they needed to be in that class, because that really was a high end niche class. And so we pivoted extremely quickly and went to, I think, was probably the best ever essential handgun class taught on the planet, because it was Tim, Ashton, me, Brett, and we were like on the fly collaborating, coaching, and it was a blast. Well, you guys, from that experience and an experience I had with Spencer Keepers and some other things that I've done on my own, were what laid the foundation for my trigger management class, because I codified all that into a single presentation. And so thank you for being part of that, and for everything else that you've been a part of. And eat some Brahms for me when you're in Oklahoma, and go get some Sean's uh, brisket for me there in Culpeper. And
We'll do that, sir. We'll do that, sir.
all right, and thanks for coming on tonight, man.
Thanks for having me, Lee. Great talk to you.
Great talking to you.